I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone, it's time for TGU, the weekly discussion program from VLGA Connect, where we look at all things local government, the stuff in the headlines, the stuff behind the headlines. And to help us do that, I have from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors, Tony Ranick. G'day, Tony.
G'day, Chris and Julie.
You look cold, Tony.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't feel like summer, does it? Not today.
We're all shivering on the first day of summer. Julie Reid is here with us as well. Hi, Julie.
Yeah, hi, Chris. And look, it's giving a little bit of breathing space for the councils that have got beaches to get ready for the onslaught when the heat does come.
Oh, that's a nice little link there. I hadn't thought about that. Always thinking about the impacts on local government, aren't you?
Oh, always, Chris, always.
Well, I was just saying to you before we started recording that my finger was on the button to turn the heater on this morning. I just couldn't bring myself to do it on the 1st of December and the first day of summer, but I think this will be a distant memory looking at the forecast in just a few days.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at some of the stories making news around the world of local government this week, and there's quite a bit to talk about. This Glenelg Shire countback situation is ongoing. I think we've had 3 attempts at last count so far, possibly a 4th by now. I'll double check that. Tony, nobody wants to take up this first of 2 vacant positions on the council. They're all turning it down.
That's right. Latest being former councillor Jeff White, who said he's far too busy to take on the role, despite having been the candidate with the highest tally on the recent countback.
Do you know what I like about that, though? He's 88 and he's too busy to take on the role.
Wow.
Good for him.
Plenty of activity still going on in Jeff White's life, but 4 remaining potential candidates for further countbacks there in Glenelg. But yeah, increasingly we're looking at candidates with quite low numbers of votes at the last election.
So just for the record, according to the VEC, a 4th countback, this hasn't been updated, says will be held online at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 29th. Of course, that's passed. I've seen nothing formal from the VEC, which means we're probably, because we're still in that 48-hour period where one of those 4 candidates needs to return the declaration of qualification. But as you say, Tony, I'm interested in Julie's take on this. These candidates received between 0.9% and was less than 3.5% of the primary vote at the election in 2020. And some have rightly asked the question, well, should you get a seat on council when that very small number of the community actually gave you their preference in the first place?
Yes, Chris, I mean, I agree with the community as well. I mean, it's a very, very low proportion of the vote. So, it's kind of, does it question there's sort of slim pickings there? I think it does, So are they truly representing the community that the community's views about who's a credible candidate? So look, but this is the process the VEC go through. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens. It's an extraordinary situation. We don't often get this.
No, we don't. And there's still another vacancy with another countback scheduled for next week, which I assume is going to rely on that remaining pool of 3 candidates. So, Tony, is this sort of suggesting to us, is this an aberration, or is it suggesting to us that something needs to be tweaked in the legislation because of a situation like this?
Yeah, I think it does call for us, the legislators to have another look at those provisions in the Local Government Act. I think it's Division 8 that deals with countbacks. Don't blame them for the current situation. It probably was never envisaged we'd see this number of resignations in a council term and resignations at a particular council, and then successful countback candidates unwilling to take up the position. But I'd suggest that there might need to be a minimum proportion of votes that a candidate can receive on a countback to be offered a position, and that might be 5% or something like that. And then if there's no candidate with that number of votes, then maybe a by-election would need to occur. So there's at least that more sense of a mandate for the incoming councillor. But the VEC are hamstrung now. They're stuck with the existing laws, which means something like, you know, at that lower end at 0.9% with about 13,000 votes last election, you're talking about just over 100 votes might be enough to get someone in as councillor.
Extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is
So
extraordinary.
that's yet to play out. And of course, Glenelg has a vacancy at the CEO level as well. So a big decision in front of the council, whoever constitutes the council, to be made in the coming months also.
What number are we up to now, Chris, for resignations of council?
Oh, no, I'm glad you... I'm glad you asked me that. I think it's 57. The latest one, and we'll get to this, is sadly a death of a current councillor, which we'll come back to. But I did ask Sven Blumel, the VEC commissioner on VLGA Connect earlier this week, how that stacks up against previous terms. And he said it's not actually that much more, although we are just, we still have a year to go. But I think the 28, 29, possibly 30 this year is probably above and beyond in terms of within a 12-month period. But he said it wasn't that starkly different to trends through other council terms, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's good to get that answer, because I was starting to get really worried there was this upward trend. So yeah, great.
It is more. It is more, but it's only slightly more, I think was the message. Okay. Last week we talked a bit, and we did engage in a little bit of speculation about what might have been happening at a couple of councils where quorums hadn't been achieved. One of them was Brimbank, and a meeting was deferred by 24 hours. The business on the agenda was ultimately passed with a quorum achieved, but by the bare minimum. Tony, Julie, some of our speculation appears to be a bit wide of the mark, at least according to some of the comments we've received from viewers and listeners last week, who've pointed to other issues at play. And they've now been exposed a bit in the media, with a local newspaper report quoting two councillors as saying they weren't attending the meetings because they considered the workplace to be unsafe. Now, that's a serious concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point being here that, you know, the councillors saying it wasn't any of the agenda items that were of concern to them. Those councillors didn't attend because of those fears around their personal health and safety. A number of councillors have come out. I think Councillor Maria Kerr, Councillor Virginia Takos are quoted in the media, at least, as mentioning those reasons. The other councillors have talked about being unwell. So that does still suggest that there seems to be a real concern there in terms of the functioning of the council cohort at Brimbank presently, and I guess watch this space in terms of whether the state government does anything in relation to that, or what council itself is doing to try and repair some of those or deal with some of those concerns that have been raised publicly by at least some councillors.
Yeah, this is a really complex and vexed issue for CEOs, isn't it, Julie, when you've got councillors with OHS concerns, that whole grey area about the workplace and where councillors sit in that?
That's right. So very, very difficult situation. Look, because I don't know the full details of all of this, I'd be sort of reluctant to comment around, you know, what the CEO is going through at the moment. But certainly, you know, there is an obligation by the CEO to make sure the workplace is safe. But, you know, we know that councillors are in a different situation, but they do deserve to be in a workplace that is safe as well.
As you say, we don't want to engage in more speculation, but there's a little bit of clarity, I guess, emerging as to some of the issues that are at play there. But I think the comments, particularly Tony made last week, still stand, that there is in, perhaps not in this case, a tendency at some councils, and I'm not just talking Victoria here, to use not attending a meeting, so a quorum's not achieved, to avoid making some decisions. Perhaps not in this case, but certainly there's been examples of that, Tony.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Although, again, you know, happy to say that's not the expressed reasons of that that group of 5 or 6 councillors who weren't present at that particular meeting, or those particular 2 meetings this time around.
The other council that has struggled to achieve a quorum or just failed to achieve a quorum for the purpose of electing a mayor is Strathbogie. There's quite a bit in the public domain, and we've talked about this at length, so we probably don't need to go into too much detail. There's a couple of points we do want to make. The mayor this week has formally called on the minister to act in relation to a municipal monitor's report that's been sitting with the minister for quite a while now, a few months, I think. And you can understand that. The call is, let's have some decisive action here so that we can move on.
Yeah, it's a bit unclear about what the delay is there, Chris. I'm not too sure what's going on behind the scenes, but obviously there is a delay that's causing some stress for the council. And they are, coming out, obviously the mayor's coming out and saying that quite clearly. There's a really clear message back to the minister about that. So, the time is of the essence in situations like this, I think. So let's hope that they get some kind of answer soon about, at least the release of the report. And from the monitor, and at least a direction by the minister.
Yes, it's not in anyone's interest for it to drag on, is it, Tony?
No, I agree. I think it would appear that politically they're hopelessly entrenched in there at the moment, and it's just, look, to me, it's been too long. It's time to end the agony, is my view, and I understand that there may be delays in finalising monitor reports, identifying administrators, etc. But there are other options, interim options, if you like, available to the minister, and I would think it's past time for the minister to act here, just in terms of the community needing to see a solution and see that council can function in some form moving forwards. Yeah.
The other point I do want to raise is the Mayor, Laura Binks, went on ABC Radio last week and spoke very eloquently, and you could actually hear the frustration in her voice as well about trying to move through these issues. No sooner than she'd been on the air, one of the other councillors, Robin Weatherald, rang in to Talkback Radio and made what I thought was some pretty outrageous comments about the leadership of the council, and actually accused the Mayor of acting like a schoolgirl. And I just thought, that is not helpful. It's not appropriate. We're in the middle of the 16 Days of Activism program, which is all about gender-based violence and equity. And, I don't know that it's for us to be the ones calling that out. Perhaps we can do that now, but I haven't heard anyone actually take him to task for those public comments, which I just thought was so wrong.
And it's all about respect as well, Chris, and gender-based respect. I was a bit surprised about those comments, and I think that any woman or any person probably would take offence at those kind of comments publicly. So, you're right to mention that, and very right for us to call that out, because there is such good work going on across councils in the 16 Days of Activism. There's lots of publicity around how much councils support this program. So, really disappointing to hear that, particularly from a woman's perspective. I could understand how she might feel in a situation like that.
Oh, no doubt. And do we think he'd make the same comment if the mayor was a male and was trying to, trying to exercise some leadership and navigate through what clearly are some challenging issues, Tony?
Oh, look, I think it's a poor choice of language. I agree with you on that. I think it's for the councillor in question to kind of reflect on his language and indicate whether he has some remorse about that or what his intentions were. Clearly, I just feel for the community at the moment too. I mean, there are multiple statements on the official website of council from councillors about their individual positions. As if I was a ratepayer in there, I'd find that it all somewhat upsetting that seeing the different positions being put by the councillors and seeing that there's clearly going to be an issue. It is an issue now. If the council was to need to meet to resolve something, critical for the community. Perhaps they could pull together to do that. But one would think that, the ability for that council to just perform the usual day-to-day governance operations that councillors do is extremely constrained at the moment, and one would think that must have an impact on the local community. And the Minister for Local Government's, ultimately responsible to make a decision about this. And I think the time's well and truly come.
We might make that the last word on the issue. We understand it's difficult for all concerned, and let's hope, as you say, we get some resolution soon. Other stories in the news. This wasn't a good look either. Port Phillip, a culture of laziness, it's been called, exposed in a Channel 9 expose. This is supposedly two whistleblowers, former staff members, blowing the whistle on some practices that 9 News seems to have confirmed. Now the CEO, Chris Carroll, has responded and said we have a range of tools that we use to monitor and measure performance, but obviously this is not the sort of story that any council wants to see in the media.
Yeah, serious allegations, aren't they? And look, we don't know. We don't know whether they're factual, they're accurate. Certainly, there was some footage on that bulletin that many people would have seen. Some former employees, or at least contractors to council, made statements. One would think that there's some investigation that will be implemented, perhaps even underway. And as there ought be. I mean, the community of Port Phillip would expect that, and these allegations will be tested, and ultimately, if they're justified, one would think there'll be action taken, because it would not be acceptable.
No.
If it were true, it would not be acceptable for this level of inactivity to be occurring with public funds being applied towards people's salaries. But it needs to be tested. We've only heard one side of the story, and even if it does turn out that there is fault somewhere, that wouldn't indicate fault amongst the entire council cohort, all the workers at Port Phillip, or indeed all the workers in the street cleaning team, where I think the allegations are targeted towards.
I think that's a really good point, Tony. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, Chris, I think this is a really difficult one for the CEO. From a CEO perspective, you would be looking to try and understand in detail what has gone on in this circumstance, and start to dig a little bit more into the culture. We know that we've had cultural issues with outdoor workers. We remember that issue with culture at Moira that were reported on. A lot of councils are really tuned into this now, understanding what's happening in those outdoor workforces in terms of culture. So a lot of looking at that really, really carefully. So I suspect that he's onto that, looking at what's happened, trying to understand the culture, because he will be concerned that the reputation of the council is protected, and that there is good service happening out there to the community that deserves it. So there will be a lot of internal work going on to try and address that matter if it has been exposed in a way that it's saying in the media. It may be not quite as extreme. We just don't know. So behind the scenes.
No, exactly. And as Tony said, I think we just take it at face value for now, and wait to see what more might come from that. Another decision of a council that has made big news this week is Darebin, where they've overturned a long-standing requirement for newer homes to not have access to on-street parking permits, is how I understand it in simple terms. A few people are surprised that the council's made this decision, Tony, and it was against officer recommendation.
Yeah, well, that's right. So this policy's been in place for 20 years, approximately, since 2004. So homes built after 2004 now can, with the recent resolution, Monday night's resolution, now can apply for resident parking permits for those on-street parking bays, which, as you say, is a reversal of that prior policy, which was about, trying to incentivize developers to provide off-street parking in their residential developments. I think it was a narrow resolution, was passed narrowly. It was, as you say, contra the officer recommendation, but that regularly happens at councils. I did read the officer report, and while there were some different numbers in news stories, what I noted, the officer report said that according to their consultation or surveys, 59% of the community agreed that new dwelling developments, including rebuilds, should be allowed to access resident permits. So what I'd say is that the councillors seem to be reflecting in this resolution what the majority of the community is asking for. Right. It's a 12-month trial. Will the community still support this after 12 months when they're presumably having to live with less available car parks because of more permits having been issued? And so I think we won't really know the outcome of this until the 12-month trial, if you like, concludes, and we see the impact.
And it's an interesting situation, because I always find parking permits interesting because it doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed a car park spot. You've got a permit, but if there's more permits than spots available, then you might still have to park down around the corner. So it's an interesting situation, that balance of how many permits versus how many spaces that are available on the street. And then people are often disappointed if they've got a permit and they can't get a space. So anyway, interesting to see what comes out of that one in 12 months. Let's see what happens.
Councils always try to tread this fine line, aren't they? There's differing views on a whole range of issues, and we often call them wicked problems. So as you say, 12 months trial, we'll see what comes of that. I do notice one of the councillors that wasn't in support of that, Suzanne Newton, has just been elected as the new mayor of Darebin. That happened last night as we record. So congratulations to Suzanne. Tony and Julie, we're nearly to the end of mayoral election season. There's only a couple of gaps on the list. I think Wodonga will be the last one on the 11th of December to complete the list for the year.
Are they doing it in alphabetical order, Chris?
No, they're not. No. Well, if they were, it'd be Yarry Ambiak would have been last, but Kylie Zank has been re-elected as mayor there for, I think, a second or third term, I forget, but certainly a couple of terms at least. So well done to all those new mayors and returned mayors. There's a full list on the Local Government News Roundup website. Serious one, a sad one, Tony and Julie. I was a bit surprised last weekend to see a statement pop into my inbox from the Mayor of Glen Ira, Anne-Marie Cade, noting the unexpected passing of one of that council's councillors, David Zingier. I understand he had been dealing with an illness, but his passing was not expected at that time. It was quite a surprise. So our condolences to all in the Glen Ira community.
Big blow. His wife, I think, Suzanne, children, grandchildren, I believe, local Jewish school principal, well known in that community at Glen Ira, and flags at half-mast, I think, this week at the Caulfield Town Hall, and rightly so. And Vale to David Zingier, and we our thoughts with the council officers, councillors at Glen Ira, who obviously would have had close relationships with David, and they'll be all mourning at the moment.
Yeah, and look, I was really inspired by the comments on the Glen Ira website about his contribution to the community, Chris. I mean, he was a person who never shied away from asking the big questions and challenging all of us to aim higher. That's fantastic to hear that, because that's what you kind of expect from a councillor in that strategic decision-making role. He was a passionate advocate for climate action and co-founded the Glen Ira Emergency Climate Action Network and participated in the development of the Glen Ira 2040 community vision and helped guide the Caulfield Racecourse Reserve Trust land management plan. So, you know, he's been involved in a lot of really significant projects across the council, but he was also a member of the Metropolitan Transport Forum as well, and was really looking for really strong integrated connectivity across the local community. So he sounded like he was a really respected and really hardworking councillor, and so it's really hard and really sad to see him go.
Yeah, well said, Vale David Zingia. About the third or fourth councillor to die while serving in this term of the council. That's not a stat that we like to see. So in other news, the City of Greater Shepparton has announced its new CEO. Congratulations to Fiona Legasic, who will be taking up the position in January. We did comment a few months ago, the council there had decided to advertise the position. Peter Harriott, who's been the CEO for quite some time, is moving on from the 4th of January, and we wish him absolutely all the best with what comes next for him, and we congratulate Fiona.
Yeah, it's great to see Fiona return to Greater Shepparton, Chris. So this seems to be a place that she's lived before and worked previously for Greater Shepparton up to director level, I believe. She was certainly, I think, close to 10 years in the role at Greater Shepparton. Then she went from there down to Tasmania. And had quite a significant job working with TAFE. So nice to see her return to local government and with that background at Greater Shepparton, and great to see that she's coming in fresh from being elsewhere with potentially maybe a slightly different perspective on how she can lead the organisation going forward. Yeah. So well done to her. She's no doubt going to be welcomed with open arms.
I haven't done the numbers on the gender balance of council CEOs, but that's certainly a tick in the column to perhaps get it closer to parity. I'm not sure. I think we're about 30-something, low 30% at last check.
Yeah, I don't think it's much more than that. But anyway, yeah, I think we're still got a way to go, but certainly it's moving in the right direction.
And in terms of CEO positions to be determined, I understand Bass Coast must be pretty close. That's been a while with that process. Moira is underway. And of course, we have the Glenelg situation with the CEO position to be determined in due course. And again, you can keep track of all of that on the Local Government News Roundup website. Did you want to say anything about that, Tony, before we move on?
Oh, look, I think in terms of the new CEO at Shepparton, I just call out the Mayor, Shane Scarley, made the point that, you know, the council laws really valued that unique local knowledge that Ms. Legasic will bring back into the role, and clearly that's significant for those Shepparton councillors, and they really rate her clearly. So it's awesome to see someone coming home as the leader of that organisation.
Terrific. Okay, perhaps a few stories just to note in passing for time reasons. Kudos to Pyrenees Shire. They're getting quite a bit of media attention for their housing development projects. It's been a long time in the making, of course, but as the housing shortage becomes a more and more topical issue, examples of council leadership like this are being held up as you know, the sign of things that councils can do to really tip the needle in this space.
And this is about buying and subdividing land. It's interesting because I look back at my time when I worked in New South Wales many years ago, Chris, and small rural councils were actually doing that back then. So they would rezone and subdivide land and create new subdivisions within their townships. So great to see. Great leadership. It has been hailed as being really good leadership in the housing space. So good on Pyrenees for taking the step.
And I think they're working on another project as we speak, Tony.
Yeah, another 20 or 30 lots, according to CEO Jim Nolan. He's been there quite a while, and why wouldn't they? They got all their costs back as they sold this Correa Park in across 5 stages, 100 lots. And as in his statement, Jim Nolan said, it was a case of market failure. The private sector wasn't doing it. Council stepped in, and they've been, their initiative has been shown to have been justified here, and their vision has been realised. And why not go back and try again? We know there's a shortage of available housing in some of those regional areas, particularly those ones, on the fringes of major regional centres. And Beaufort is, 50 k's out of Ballarat to the west. It would be an attractive place for many people to reside.
It's a nice little town.
Nice wine around there. Pyrenees.
Oh, is there? Ooh, now you're getting to the important things, Tony.
So well done to Pyrenees Shire. Big thumbs up there. There was an arbiter's report tabled at Horsham Rural City Council this week. Not particularly notable, I don't think, in terms of some of the reports that we've seen. Although there was one thing, Tony, I wanted to ask you about. One of the issues that the arbiter took into account here is that the complaint was brought by a councillor against the mayor, but it was secondhand, if you like. It was information that had come to the councillor, but they hadn't witnessed it themselves. How much of a factor was that in the arbiter's consideration of this issue?
Yes, well, ultimately, it was a significant factor in that through the arbitration, I should say, I provided some support to the respondent here, the Mayor, Robin Gilleen. But during the arbitration, some of the facts came to light through examination, cross-examination, etc., in terms of what actually was said in those conversations that the applicant, Councillor Ross, hadn't been present at. And in fact, some of the allegations were then withdrawn on the day as a result of those facts being brought to light. So I think what it points to is there is this gap at the moment in relation to councillor conduct frameworks where councillors can take action against other councillors for comments they've made towards councillors, staff, members of the public. Members of the public don't have an option there. I don't know whether that's ever likely to happen because elected officials, e.g. members of parliament, seem to be loath to introduce measures where elected officials can be complained about by members of the public. But I think so that has meant in this instance that a councillor has taken allegations at presumably at face value, and those allegations have been clearly proven from the arbiter decision, I should say, complete vindication of the Mayor, Robin Gilleen. All the allegations were dismissed. And she's a long-standing mayor, and I think recently re-elected.
All right, so noted. Julie, one for you. I did notice that 14 planning scheme amendments were gazetted as of today. Not particularly notable in that sense, but I think these were the last to be brought into alignment with the new changes to support the decriminalisation of sex work in Victoria. And what caught my eye was that amendment comes into effect today, the 1st of December.
That's right, it does, Chris. And this has been coming for some time over the last couple of years. The department's been working on this. This is Amendment VC 217 to the Victorian planning provisions. So what it basically means is the sex services businesses can now operate anywhere a shop can, okay? So this means that a sex services business is permitted in the same place as a shop can operate. So there are, subject to the same conditions and requirements of shops in zones. So basically that's one of the provisions. The other one is that anyone can undertake sex work from their home. Using their home for sex services will be subject to certain conditions, and this is something along the lines of the home must be a primary place of residence and the business must not adversely affect the amenity of the neighbourhood. Now, there was quite a bit of concern by councils early on to this particular change in the planning scheme, particularly because of the impact on amenity in the neighbourhood. But obviously that's gone ahead. And really the department are saying, if you or a neighbour are concerned that home-based sex work adversely affecting the neighbourhood, you can report it to the local council. So it puts it back, the onus on councils to monitor complaints around anything in this space. But overall, I think that it was trying to create a situation where it was a much more healthy workplace for sex workers. There's lots of arguments around from the Department of Health, etc., and WorkSafe, and equal opportunity and human rights, etc. So there's lots of discussions in that space around this one. So looks like these are the last cabs off the rank, I would assume, that have now complied with that.
You would think so if it's coming into effect today.
Tony,
have you been called on to provide advice on the implications of this for councillors?
No, I haven't. And certainly I'm familiar with the changes to the Sex Work Act some time ago, and these planning scheme changes really bring the planning schemes into line there. That term brothel is no longer sort of the planning term anymore. It's sex services premises. I don't know whether some of those rules about proximity to schools and places of worship still apply or not. They may. I just don't know the answer to that. But it seems that element slipped under the radar for me recently.
Okay. All right. We'll note that in passing. We'll note there's a national cat vaccine shortage, and a number of councils are starting to make changes to cat trapping services, shelter services as a result, because they can't vaccinate the cats, obviously, as they come into the shelters. Hume, Brimbank, Ballarat and Greater Geelong have caught my eyes making statements in the last week or so. I suspect there'll be more to follow. There was, folks, a release last week of the Victorian Kangaroo Harvest Management Plan, and that's out for feedback. In the detail, 10 Melbourne metropolitan councils will be removed from that kangaroo culling program from the 1st of January 2025. Nillumbik is one of those councils, and it has this week resolved to support that removal, but also advocate for it to be brought forward to take effect this coming January. They're basically saying, why wait 12 months? I think this garnered a bit of news a month or two back from one of the regional councils, Tony, if I remember rightly, making a stand on it.
I'm sure that's right. So as you say, this is it's a draft plan that's out there for comment, public comment, until the 11th of December. But there has been, Nillumbik's recent decision is off the back of some a strong local community campaign, I think, a petition with, 14,000 signatures. This Victorian kangaroo harvesting program is about, commercial harvesting of kangaroos on private land. So that's where it impacts. It's we'll see ultimately whether the draft plan is implemented in its current form or not when the community consultation comes in.
Some councils in other parts of Australia are making news this week around their position on acknowledgements of country. We've now got 2 South Australian councils that have made significant changes. One has removed the acknowledgement of the country from all of its documents. The city of Playford has removed it from its council meetings. And then over in WA, the Shire of Harvey has rejected a notice of motion from one of its councillors to remove the acknowledgement of country. This is becoming a thing, folks.
I'm a bit surprised about this, Chris. I thought we were heading in the direction of more support for this.
Yeah.
So I was a bit surprised to see it. Obviously, it has hurt deeply elders, across the Indigenous communities, and that's obviously what is playing out in the media. I think, I'm surprised to see it.
Well, I think councils will typically try and reflect the views of their community. And this is a diverse range of communities. I was sort of surprised when I saw a metropolitan capital city council do this in the city of Playford, which is the kind of northern suburbs of Adelaide, I think. Whereas some of these remote regional communities. There's often strong views about on the ground about local issues to do with the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. So I imagine that these are decisions being made by councillors to try and attempt to reflect community views. I hope that's the case, rather than individual councillors just expressing ideologies.
All right, remains to be seen whether that is a movement or not. Let's hope it's not. Tony, you've spotted a story out of Sydney that you thought was worth us touching on this week.
Yeah, I
think the housing stuff again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we can probably call, Chris and Julie, that that trend to remove planning powers in relation to medium density housing developments from local councils is locked in nationwide now, and the latest being decision by the New South Wales government impacting on Sydney, the Hunter Valley, Central Coast, Illawarra, those really highly populated areas of New South Wales where planning controls have been changed such that councils must approve these kind of terrace house, duplex type developments within 800 metres of a transport hub, train station, metro station, those sorts of things. So it's not just in Victoria, it's a national trend. And I think unless we see, a state government lose power partly because of a community, backlash in relation to this, then I think this trend is kind of locked in and is happening, and local government really is just having to deal with it.
Yeah,
Julie, is this Sydney approach similar to what the government in Victoria has done with the priority precincts in the housing statement?
Yes, I think so. I'm not across all of the detail, but I think that it's certainly very similar. So there must be the ministers for planning across the country must be talking to each other, I think, because
I'm sure they are.
There is there is a whiff of similarity with all of these decisions, particularly in relation to this type of housing within 800 metres of, say, train stations. Yeah.
Well, there's a national target, isn't there? And I'm sure they've all talked about the various levers that they have available to them to have some influence there. Julie, what's your pick for this week?
Yeah, look, Chris, I just wanted to acknowledge that, local government continue to deal with emergencies across the state and play a huge role in emergency management, and just recognising the great job that they do. Once the emergency services leave, they're left to clean up and rebuild communities. We've just seen this week Swan Hill has had a 1 in 50-year flash flood. So there's some amazing pictures of the flooding that's happened up there. And Scott Barber, the CEO up there, was speaking to the press about now, how they're working to restore the impact of that flood. And of course, we've seen out of East Gippsland that we've had a landslide in Mallacoota. The town was cut off. Again, poor Mallacoota gets affected again. They dealt with fires not that long ago, and now they're dealing with floods, And this is the state that we're in at the moment. I was down at Mornington Peninsula this week, and the staff were reminding me it wasn't that long ago that there were, storms that absolutely hammered the council area, and they're bracing themselves ready for when's the next big storm going to come at Mornington Peninsula. So, look, I think that just an acknowledgement of the great work that local government does in this space, with very, very little resources, particularly, Swan Hill Council, Rural City Council, is a very small council with very, low amounts of resources. And so to be able to deal with this kind of issue, the same with East Gippsland, it's always those ones with limited resources that get hammered. Yep.
Yeah, well said. The state we're in, you said. I'm sure the pun wasn't intended, but it does feel like the new normal, doesn't it?
It does feel like the new normal, and as we know, we've got sort of many councils that have declared climate emergencies, etc., and they're seeing lots of these types of issues happening. So yeah.
Perhaps one more from me. You'll be interested in this, Julie, because you keep an eye on what's happening in the UK pretty closely. Nottingham City Council this week became the 11th UK council to effectively declare bankruptcy, filing a Section 114 notice, as it's known, which means all discretionary spend stops. They only spend on services they are legally required to provide. It really is in crisis mode now in the UK, isn't it?
It certainly is, Chris, and not surprising to see the 11th council coming on board, and we don't want to see that happen here.
No.
We've got some challenges going forward with rate capping, as we have spoken about on many occasions, that is only going to have an accumulative effect on councils. We don't want to end up in the same space as the UK. Really disappointing to see that there's yet another one, and likely to be more announced as time goes on, I'm sure.
I was going to say, always thinking, folks, should they reprise the Sheriff of Nottingham role, the tax collector there at Nottingham? Unfortunately, Alan Rickman, who played it so well in that,
passed away,
overshadowed Kevin Costner. He's not available, but
Yeah,
maybe they need to look outside the lateral solution at Nottingham.
We'll pass that on your behalf, Tony, and see whether that gets legs. I did want to mention that one of the mayoral outcomes this week was at Nillumbik, where Ben Ramcharan was re-elected for a second consecutive term in the role. And there's a nice photo of Ben and the Deputy Karen Egan standing in front of the Rogues Gallery. And if you use your eagle-eyed vision, you'll see a familiar face up in the top right-hand corner of that photograph.
But I had hair on the back of my head as well as the front. But, another story.
Sorry, did I say Rogues Gallery? I meant the official mayoral formal gallery. Slip of the tongue.
I'm going to have a look at that one.
Have a look at that one, and that's a bit of homework for you. And I think that's where we might draw the line for this edition of TGU. Just a few more to come before we call it quits for the year. I think maybe 2. We'll work that out. Thank you, Julie. As always, have a great week until we see you again.
Thanks, Chris. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And Tony, thank you, as always, for your advice and insights and the support from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers for the program.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Julie.
That's TGU in the can for another week. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.